film is a physical object. It creates an interpretation of the reality with chemicals in the emulsion on the film. And this interpretation is defined by the combination of chemicals and the light, the type of light, the spectrum. So the image we get on film is not the reality itself as we see it, but the interpretation of that particular film. And there are different stocks of film that create a very different interpretation. Kodak, Fuji, different types of film produced by Kodak create a very different interpretation. Digital image is also an interpretation of the reality by the software. Different companies like Canon and Sony, they have very different software, and that's what makes their images very different. Like Canon, for example, is famous for have a very good interpretation of skin tones. And that's the famous feature of the Canon color science. And this color science is the software that interprets the signal coming from the sensor. And even if two companies use exactly the same sensor, they could get completely different images because they use different color science, different software. So when we scan film, we create a digital interpretation of the chemical interpretation of the film. So when you send your film to the lab, the scans that you get back is not exactly what your film looks like. It's an interpretation of the lab. So what happens in the lab is that they use the professional scanning machines like Naritu or Frontier, and they have different software built into them. They can give you a different interpretation of your film just based on the type of the machine that they use. And then after that, the operator of the lab will take the images and process them, adjust them a little bit to make them look nicer to what they think like the good image should look like. So that is very subjective interpretation of the film that you have. I'm an amateur photographer. I've started shooting film about 5 months ago. And of course, my first rolls of film I've sent to the lab for development and scanning. And the results that I received, they were interesting, but I was not particularly happy about the colors. They were too vivid and very contrasty. I had to dial down the contrast a lot. The black and white images were way too grainy. And I actually shot film before in the past, like in early 2000s and even in late 80s. And back in the day, we used to print the film, and I don't remember the prints being as vivid and contrasty and that grainy. So I thought there might be something wrong going on there. I want to give it a try myself and create my own interpretation. I want to see what is there, what else is there in the film that maybe is missing in this interpretation that I received. So I've tried to find the easiest and cheapest way to scan, and first I was really discouraged and disappointed of my results, but then I figured out the way how to scan it, and that changed everything for me. I think the best way to explain is with examples. So let's get to the computer. I'll show you a couple images and compare scans from the lab with my own scans. So here are my couple images that I want to show you. Let's start with the black and white, which is the easiest. So this is the scan from the lab, from the local lab, where I developed my first roll of HP5. And when I'm looking at the image, first of all, I think I must have missed the exposure here, because I completely lost all of the details in the blacks. And the image is so grainy that I think that must be underexposed a lot, and it's so contrasty, and maybe I kind of like that the certain parts are completely black, but it would be nice to have an option to see if there are any details that I would want to have. Let's take a look at the negative that I scan myself. I scanned it with the Canon EOS R, with the mirrorless Canon camera, and even on the negative, when we're looking at the negative, you can see that, oh, there are some details in these parts of the image. So let's try to convert it. So the first way, how I tried to convert it, that caused a lot of disappointment for me, was the wrong way, which you should not do. So what I did, let's create a virtual copy and mess with it. So what I first tried is, like what I found online, is you can just invert the image. Invert, you know, blacks and whites, and you'll get the positive exposure. So let's try to do that and see what happens. So we can make it black and white. So let's invert it. It actually doesn't look bad with black and white, but what I noticed is that if the certain area of the image is too overexposed or underexposed, you can get some weird artifacts with that. But with black and white, you can just inverse the points of black and white and it kind of looks okay. Let's compare it with the lab scan. So what we can see here is that there are details, and my exposure was not that bad. And it's grainy, of course, but we can recover some details here, and we can play with that negative to achieve different results. Like my scan on the left side is way better than the lab, and I don't mind making the certain parts of the image pitch black. Maybe I would actually prefer it and go for it, but I can just adjust my own image and make my own decisions how I want it to look like. I prefer to have that flexibility to make decisions for myself rather than trying to recover it from the interpretation or from the lab. And when you get that result from the lab, there are no details. There's pitch black in certain parts of the image. There's nothing to recover even. So let's try to develop the image using the Negative Lab Pro. So that's the software that I found, which makes everything way easier and creates wonderful results, way better than just inverting it manually. So that's the software, and that's the raw file from camera. So it detects that it's a digital camera, and we're using black and white. I need to press convert negative. There we go. And I usually play with tones. There are different types of tones, so you can have like a lab standard, and it creates the way more contrast than I like as linear. I prefer linear usually. It creates a flatter image, but you have freedom to move the controls and to play with the image to get your own interpretation. For this particular one, cinematic reach, it looks actually really good. I like it. Let's go with it. I usually add some sharpening. Cool, so let's compare that. First, let's compare it with my own, just a very naive version of the image, just with the tone curves. And you can see it looks a little bit different. The grain is a little bit different, maybe a bit softer, as you can see. Slightly, barely, but when you process the image, it adds up. So it's slightly less grainy, or the grain is kind of softer than just with my own inversion on the tone curve. And with all the controls that I have there in the software, in the Negative Lab Pro, I have more control over the contrast of the image and the black and whites and so on. But it's close enough, it's fair. So now if we compare it with the lab scan, well, this is day and night, right? I have a lot of details. I noticed that I didn't crop the image that came from the lab, but I noticed that they cropped quite a bit here and they rotated the image. So I have more information here, which I can play with, and I can move it in different directions. Here, if you look in the highlights, this is way different. Right, this is very specific look, and it may be a good look which you would want to go for, but I can make these changes in my own scan and just add contrast, move the black point and make it darker if I wanted to. I could achieve the same results if I wanted to, but I can also go another way and recover details and make it look different. So when I tried that with the black and white film, I realized like, wow, this is amazing. I actually need to do that myself. I really need to get into scanning myself. I don't want to just get the interpretation from the lab. This is day and night. And then I tried the color film, and this was very discouraging at first. So let's look at the second image that I have. This is Kodak Ektar 100, and I watched a lot of reviews of Ektar, and I heard that it's vivid, but that's not how I imagined it to be, actually. So this was scanned by the quite popular online lab. So I created this negative again with my Canon EOS R, and the first time I tried to invert it. Let's create another virtual copy to mess with it. I did the same. I took the tone curve and I just inversed the image. And that's what I got. Not particularly the result I expected, I must tell you. So play a little bit with the white balance. Exposure doesn't look right and it's a negative, so I need to actually do everything in reverse. But it's quite frustrating, and I was kind of disappointed what I get, and I didn't really know what should I do with it. And you kind of can get closer to something, but it's not really. It's kind of a lot of messing around with these controls, and it's really hard to invert the negative that way. We can compare what we have in right away. So this is quite different. This is very different already. I'm not particularly happy with the scan that I have at this point. Let's use Negative Lab Pro. What it is recommended to do with the software is to change the white balance, and the way to change the white balance is to actually use part of the film to pick the white balance, pick the target for neutral, because this part of the image is the film which is not exposed, so it's the true color of the film itself, because all different films, they have different colors. The foundation of the film has different color. The black and white film has a very different foundation. Different types of color films, they also have a different color of the foundation of the film. So we need to balance it here. After we do that, we can use the Negative Lab Pro again, and we need to choose different type of scanning. So we have also options how we can scan to give it a different look. Frontier, probably a bit more warm. Naritsu, a bit more green-ish from my experience. I like to go with Frontier, but it depends on the taste. Also, yes, it's a digital camera scan, so let's convert the negative. And here we go. Immediately a really good result, like way better than when I inverted the curve points. And we can play with the tone as well. This is a bit too contrasty. I would maybe go with linear or with the linear deep. Yeah, I think linear deep is a bit more, it's a bit flatter and warmer, but it gives me some room for playing with shadows and highlights. And we also need to choose the white balance when we're scanning, of course, because it's really important. And we have already some presets. I know that's the Kodak Actor, so I use a Kodak white balance preset. And now it looks way better. We also need to add a little bit more sharpness, and that's it. So that interpretation of the image makes way more sense to me. Let's compare it with the lab scan. So comparing that is a day and night for me. The lab scan is way over-processed. Too vivid, too much contrast, loss of some details. And, well, of course, my scan is also higher resolution because I'm using a 30 megapixel camera, and the images I got from the lab are not the highest resolution that they can make. They can make a higher resolution, of course, but you need to pay more for it. And to my taste, the colors from my scan are way more natural and kind of representative of the film than this. This is a particular style which, you know, somebody could go for, but I would prefer to have more flexibility again. And when I received that scan, I tried to adjust it and I tried to reduce the contrast quite a bit. I had to reduce the contrast quite a lot. And then maybe make it a little bit less vivid. Maybe a bit too much. Try to see if I need to lift shadows a little bit. See if the highlights, and then maybe a little bit down. You see where I'm going with this? So now if we compare it again, now it's not as obvious. So obviously the scan is on the left side because it's still way more vivid, but it's getting closer. So when I was adjusting the lab scan, I was trying to tailor down the contrasts and colors. I was getting closer to the actual scan that I have. So there you go. I think if you're in any way serious about your film photography, you have to scan yourself. You have to create your own interpretation of the film. Development is another rabbit hole. You can mess a lot during a development. So that might be something what I should try next, but scanning definitely. Scanning changes the image so much. It introduces so much style, and it involves so many decisions on how the image should look like and colors that definitely need to scan at home. Let me know if you're curious about the scanning setup. I can create a video explaining how I actually shoot with a DSLR. But otherwise, thanks for watching. See you next time.